Said, without further ado, I want to hand over to our next presentation that will be delivered by Prakash Panjwani, our President and CEO of SafeNet, the first CEO of SafeNet that has a history in licensing because he was responsible for the software monetization business unit before he was promoted to CEO later, which is very great for us to see that we are represented at the top with someone that understands our business very well. During Prakash's tenure at SafeNet for way over 10 years, he has extended the software monetization product portfolio significantly. I think we, looking back, the fact that we have a back office solution today called EMS that was originated under Prakash's time. A professional services organization was built up from scratch to help our customers, particularly with back office related requirement. A managed services organization and infrastructure was being set up under his tenure so we can host back office components for our customers. And of course, the entire cloud offering, cloud-based licensing solution was developed under Prakash's time. So over to you, Prakash, and looking forward to your view on SafeNet. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. I'm using this mic? All right. So Ansgar gets to move. I get to stand right here, I guess. I'm just kidding. Just kidding, Ariel. I'm good. By the way, I'm trying to wonder why the SafeNet people are all standing back there. Like, are you trying to prevent people from exiting? Is that the idea? Or? It's pretty intimidating, by the way, when you're up here. So that was the first hint that you should probably sit down. But I'll try again later. So thanks, Ansgar, and welcome everyone to, I think in the US, I believe this is we started our first LicensingLive in 2007 at the Fairmont, San Jose, I think near the convention center. And I asked Marian Gunther, who used to run it, actually now she runs our field marketing for our other division, and I asked her for the attendee list. And she sent me the list the other day. And I think it would be just good technology. I hope I don't miss anyone. Trying to see who the common people have been throughout that time. So from the SafeNet side, I think it was easy. I think it was Tom Ibarra over there. Now you can stand up if you want. I'm just kidding. Jam, whom you know very well. Me, of course, at that time. And then we had Matt Cristiano. I think Matt. And Matt hasn't aged at all. We all have, but he looks exactly the same. It's amazing. Amy Connery, I believe. I don't think she's coming down, right? And I think Manoj from Cisco, right? I think I haven't seen him yet, but I think he's here as well at some point. Did I miss anybody who was here at the 2007 LicensingLive event? By the way, Matt, if you think you're going to get something, no, not that. There's no iPad, there's no iWatch. It was just to mention that we have some people who have stuck around with that group that long, but also to acknowledge that whether it's SafeNet or non-SafeNet people here, you could just see the amazing amount of people who have now are attending these events, but also just shows you the interest in licensing, right? Kind of where things have evolved, which is what Ansgar was referring to, that over the last several years, it's become a hot topic for many, many different reasons. And I think that leads to kind of the topic here. I wanted to kind of speak to, something about what we have gone through. So it's somewhat of a true story, like they say in movies, right? It's based on a true story, but it's not all true. But just to kind of look at our history a little bit as a company, how we have evolved. And the reason I picked this theme, well, first of all, it's factually true, right? Going from $20 million company to $400 million, kind of what we have gone through as a company. And we're no different than any other high-tech company out there. But, it's one of them was just purely factual because I think over the last couple of years, we have within our company a division called Data Protection Division. We do security products for the enterprises. And, over the last couple of years, licensing has become a really hot topic internally. Now, you would imagine a company that has a licensing division, right, why that was such a suddenly a hot topic, not the years before. And it's, you can scratch your head about why it is, but it comes down to executive priorities. You license your products a certain way, which is what we did when we were building up that enterprise data protection division in the company. And then you realize certain things have to evolve, right? And now it's one of the hottest topics. We have Dave DeMillo here, who kind of led a licensing workshop, who does it for our customers. He did one for internally as well about a year and a half ago. And now it's turned to a bigger project inside the company to get licensing embedded. And I just want to kind of walk you through why the priorities shifted, right? Because I think it's no different than probably what's happening inside your companies, especially if you own the licensing project, if you're here for that reason. And just give you that. The second reason is somewhat nostalgic, I would say. And not just the nostalgic about 2007 Licensing Live, but more about, we just hit a milestone as a company, which is that we announced in August that we're in the process of merging with a company called Gemalto. So I just gave you our number. Gemalto is about, by the way, at some point after billions, it doesn't matter as much, I guess, but it's about $3 billion US company, based out of Netherlands and France and all over the world as well. And those of you who don't know Gemalto, if you're using a cell phone, using a product, right? They are the dominant provider of SIM cards for cell phones, and they also are the #1 provider of chip cards for your, which I guess in the US we don't use much yet, but it's coming. The bank cards, the EMV chip cards as well. And this merger came together very quickly, actually, just in the last, I would say, over the summer. And it was because it was just a great fit, right? In the moving forward, if you look at it, they're very much focused on what we call the edge of the network, because it's the devices, how you actually access your infrastructure. We, on the other hand, have been very much centered on the infrastructure itself. Whether you look at licensing, our data protection group, our job has always been on kind of looking at enterprises from the inside out. And it's just a great match. By the way, nothing is going to change dramatically for you, right, in terms of it's the same group. Actually, I was telling somebody outside who asked me, I'm like, it's an interesting process because even though officially, from a purely financial perspective, they're acquiring SafeNet, it definitely feels more like a merger because we're actually integrating some of their groups under the SafeNet umbrella. So the group that today is about $400 million will turn into about a $500 million group, and will continue to operate as SafeNet. So the brand is going to be the same. The software business, the software monetization business would stay exactly the same. The people you're dealing with will be the same. Now, I don't know if that's a positive for most of you, but if you're looking for a change, you're not going to get that from this end. So Shlomo, Ansgar, people involved with the business, Jake as well, Jam, same group that you'll be working with. And if you're looking forward to like a French accent to speak with from Gemalto, unfortunately that's not going to happen either, but I think we do have a couple of people who could do very good impressions for you. So maybe during lunch, I know they're right there, Dave and Michael specialize in French impressions, so they could say a few things in French if you want about licensing. So that's about it for the merger. But I wanted to give you that here more because it's a great milestone, right, for a company that's evolved. And whether you are a privately held company or however you got to it from a VC backing or any other, how you grew a company, you always reach that milestone where somebody's going to acquire at somebody, that's your exit. But what it means also to us that's a nostalgic part, is that it was a good time to step back and look at what's kind of changed over those years. So a little bit about the history of SafeNet very quickly here. And the company was actually founded in '83, so just laying the foundation for you. And like any other company in the initial days, it was all about consulting, not really a products company in those days. And I think I would say just moved around based on where the customers took them from a consulting perspective. I think the company as we know it today really came together somewhere in about the 1998 timeframe, where the right management team at the top had come together and really decided to make it more of a products company, right? How do we grow it? Started with actually basic VPNs in those days, but kind of really evolved the business. And then I would say the last two phases have been the most interesting, right? The 2001 to 2009, I still call it, the period of hypergrowth. And I'll talk about what that meant to us, right? It was at the beginning, by the way, I joined the company in 2002, and we were exactly 20 million in revenues in those days, about 100 employees globally. And, it was when you met the management team, you knew exactly, they're like, we're just not relevant, right? At 20 million, you're not relevant. We just want to grow, right? And it was all about, and this is where a lot of companies do it differently. Our strategy was organic, but also M&A, right? We had some great markets we were already in, but how do we actually build the right organic business and then use our growth to fuel, more transactions? And, I used to run sales at that time for the company, and I used to tell our sales guys, we never waste a quarter. You have a good quarter, we'll we'll take advantage of a good quarter and do something bigger with it, right? It was that, when we say hyper-growth, it was that focus on the growth itself. And then 2009 to present, I'll talk about this phase because probably the most important phase is when it shifts to strategic growth, and I'll define that for you as well. So because I have about, I think, 15, 20 minutes, I'm not going to go through all those phases. I'm going to focus on these last two because they are the most interesting, right? Kind of how the company came together. And I'll kind of relate back to how the executive priorities have shifted over time, right? So by the way, I should probably have a couch for this session because I am kind of writing down my whole, what's happened at SafeNet over the last few years, right? The first part, the hyper-growth phase, right? It's amazing. And I'll never forget, whether it was acquisitions or organic, every executive meeting we had, we only talked about two things, products and sales. That's it. That's all that mattered, right? In the sense, which products are we going after? Are we building it organically? Is there anybody else out there who's already done it, right? Do they have revenues on it? If so, can we go talk to them to see if they want to be acquired, right? Or they want to merge with SafeNet. Sales, because ultimately you want to turn that products into revenues, you obviously need the right salespeople to get that out into the market as well, right? And the M&A part definitely became, for us, critical, but I know other companies who probably did it completely organically. We did kind of merge the two things together pretty well. And it's one of those things you get in the habit, right? One year you acquire something, next year it's organic, right? Because when you merge, after that it's about growing what you acquired, but then it builds some momentum. And we did so well with those acquisitions from a people perspective and the product and the sales perspective that it's addictive, right? You want to look for the next one, right? Because you're like, hey, we pulled that off, let's do the next one, right? But guess what's getting ignored during that time frame? IT and operations. I can't recall a single meeting in those days where we sat down as a management team and said, so where are our infrastructure going, right? What's the ERP? What are we going to do for the fact that we have now global offices? What are we going to do from an IT perspective? Business applications that we need? I don't even recall a discussion, right? Because you're so focused on products and sales. By the way, those guys are very happy. If you were a product manager or an engineer or a sales rep, you were living a whole different life at SafeNet. If you're IT and operations, you're probably, I don't know, I can speak for them, but I know now, they're probably sitting in the room somewhere going, God, this management team just doesn't get it, right? They're growing everything, but they're forgetting about what it takes to grow the company. And that leads you to this. By the way, I'll never, this is part of the true story, a little bit embellished, but it is actually factually true story. This is around 2006, I think 5 or 6 time frame. And I started, it starts with one phone call from a really, really ticked off customer, right? And they basically, and it was one of our SM customers, and they said, I ordered these tokens from you about 2 weeks ago, right? And I've had 3 different people call me asking me for the same order, and I still don't know if I'm ever going to see those tokens again. It was not a bad, so I'm like, yeah, yes, let me get on it. We'll have somebody look into it, and we'll drive it through, right? But then the next call comes. Then the third call comes. And that's when you wake up and realize we have a problem, right? Because the company has scaled on the revenue side. We had a lot of customers we added. But our customer service reps were churning, right? You have people coming in and out because they're not getting the right focus. They're not getting the right attention. The systems were not scaling. Our ERP system was probably good for when the business was doing hundreds of transactions a month, but not when you're starting doing thousands of transactions a month. Right? And at that point, the first thing you do as an executive, you solve the customer problem. Right? That's the one thing. When your products and sales and revenue driven, that definitely gets the attention. Right? So we focused on it, right, to get the right systems in place. The first time we started to think about, we hired a whole different customer service management team around it to scale the company better around that. The first new investments in our CRM, we didn't replace the CRM, unfortunately we should have at that time, but we kind of packaged it up, things to make sure that they worked right, and we got things moving again to get the customers happy. But it still doesn't solve the root cause, right? Because all we did was we solved the symptoms, we didn't solve the root cause necessarily at that point either. Why? Because those other things are still more important. Product investment, sales investment, revenue. But then you get to the third moment. The ROI pressure kicks in, right? Now, this is when your investors call you for the first time. So back in 2000, blah, 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 we helped you finance this transaction. Where's my return on it? And first thing you go is, well, we grew our revenues. Look at the revenue growth. It looks like a great chart. They're like, look at your earnings, you foolish people, right? Where are your earnings? I'm like, oh, yeah, earnings, right? And now you start to think about, yeah, I guess we have to start thinking about all the things that matter. Right? And at that point, I think, by the way, if you're in a company on this stage, the first symptom of that is your CFO or your finance guy comes into your office, and for everything you do, by the way, this is the overreaction to these things, needs an ROI. Everything. Everything needs a dashboard. If you have a marketing program to do, you need an ROI. You want to build something in IT, a new system, you need an ROI. So that's the overcompensation that finance guys go through in this phase, right? It's all about, give me metrics for everything. Why? Because they're reacting to the investors for the first time, right? Because you're trying to think about, where else do I need to invest? But all those investments take money. And how do you justify it when the pressure on you suddenly is not about revenue growth? It's for the first time ever, it's the earnings growth. And are you getting the money back, right, to them as well? So I would say not a terribly, frustrating phase necessarily for us, because our investors were always nice to us about this. On the other hand, the positive side of it was that was the first wake-up call. The first one that the oh shit moment that we went through was from a customer perspective. This one was almost a requirement, because without it, you don't really start thinking about how do you really build a company for the next phase. Because you need somebody to challenge you every now and then to really think about, where your money is going and what you're going to get for it. So to me, that set the phase for what we call the strategic growth. And I think we entered that phase, as I said, in 2009 timeframe. It started with our merger of Aladdin and SafeNet coming together, right? The company turned sizable at that point. And I would say it's the first time that you get the right balance between these three segments. Your customers matter, your investors obviously matter, but your employees matter too, right? Because until then, as I said, you're trying to do the best with what you have, right? You're not trying to invest too much in those back office areas. You're just trying to grow the company. But now you start to balance those things, right? $1 to invest, now you think seriously about, is it going to go to development? Is it going to go to sales? Is it going to go to the infrastructure side, right? And those things start to give you a better feel for, what you want to do in the future. And the reason is the term shifts to profitable growth. And this is a tough thing for a lot of the companies that are maturing. I don't have an exact number. Obviously, when you're 20 million, generating $1 million profit, nobody cares. Right? But you reach that 200, 250 million, people expect you to generate some profits, right? And I don't know how many times, even today, by the way, I have segments, I'm sure, in our business areas where people come up to me and they're like, but we're growing like crazy. Why do you care about the expenses? Why do you care about the earnings, right? Growth is there, so... And this is the thing, a lot of people get confused between, they said, I talked to one of the private equity firms once, and they said, look, people go nuts over, are we a growth company, or are we essentially, for lack of a better term, a cash cow company? Are we generating cash, and we're all happy with it? And those examples come from, in the security industry, those who know it, Checkpoint became the latter, right? They turned into a cash machine. I mean, that company just had so much business, they became a cash machine. Their growth slowed down. But then there are a lot of other security companies on the other side who are all about growth. But the bottom line is you have to balance the two, right? There's no such thing. Like if you are, living in the world where you still think that, like, if I'm going to grow 20%, I don't need to generate any earnings, that's not true at all, right? We come up with a lot of different formulas internally to motivate people. We call it the rule of 30. If you're growing 20%, you better generate 10% profits. If you're growing 15%, get 15% earnings, right? And we try a lot of different ways to get people thinking differently about business areas within our company. But in the end, you do need both, right? There is no one such thing. So the profitable growth really is about the dollar that you're adding at the top line. How does it, how much are you willing to give back, but how much are you willing to invest back as well in the company? And what brings that balance is the operation of efficiencies. And this gives the context for why licensing became important to us 2 years ago in our data protection business. Because when we looked at our business and we're looking at the growth, and we have a couple of products that are very hardware-centric, and we've been selling them forever. They're doing really well in the market. And over the last couple of years, we realized, well, you're going to tap out that market, right? It's still growing. We're happy. But will it be the case 5 years from now? And will I be here 5 years from now telling you about that story of how our hardware product got commoditized, right? Versus the fact that that same product now you could be available, and we actually offer it now through Amazon Web Services as a service. So you can go in and you can buy encryption as a service through AWS. So I'm like, we were very proud of that. The next obvious question was, well, if we're enabling that for AWS, why are we not doing it ourselves? Right? What about us creating the right models for offering some of our security products as a service? And the light bulb goes off in a lot of different people because it becomes a growth vehicle now. And you can actually save costs because you're not shipping as much hardware as you used to in the past. Your margins go up. What used to be a hardware business, you start to get the visions of turning into a software and services business. And that's exactly what drove us to the licensing. The priorities shifted for the first time at the executive level to say, you know what? We have done enough on the other areas, but now we got to put this on the map. And today it's one of our top projects across the company to drive that. We're using Central Cloud. Obviously, we're going to eat our own dog food. And we did not look at competition. Let me just be clear. That would be bad. But we did, assigned our guys to look as to how we build out a centralized way of doing licensing across the board. But we already use licensing different products. It was just a way of bringing it all together and making it ready for the cloud-centric model, right? But beyond that, we invested in CRM, right? A brand new CRM system that went into place about 2 years, went into place about a year and a half ago. But the investment started a little bit before then, right? We're the first time we're on one ERP system globally, right? As a company, we used to have pockets of ERPs everywhere. And I tell you, couldn't be happier. For the first time when we ask for reports, we get reports. It's no longer a spreadsheet that's pulled from 10 different systems and, some finance guy in the back office is pulling all this data together to send us a file in the end, right? And those things are beginning to happen, right? They took investments, and the results are beginning to show up in our earnings, right? And our investors got really happy with that, right? Now there's growth, but there's also the right amount of earnings that they can get back. But none of that would have been possible, right, without the infrastructure investment we finally made to find that right balance. But it's not easy. And I can tell you that it's a lot of hard work to kind of sit down as a management team. But setting those executive priorities is the most important thing, right? Because until everybody in the company knows that's your priority, it's not going to get done, right? So what I want to end with is, how do you get there? So if you are a project person in your own company and you're trying to get this on the radar, always start with, you got to know what your company's status is, right? Where do you belong? Where you are? By the way, that was our story. I'm sure you can relate to your own story that way as well, right? We have all evolved differently. It's never that easy climb, right? But if it is truly about revenue growth, and that's where your executive attention is, and you're trying to get them to think about licensing or about the investments you need to make, you got to start with these two things in my mind, because that's what they care most about. And if I step back and we had this back in 2002 or 3, we would have paid a lot more attention to this, right? Because when you're trying to enter new markets and you're trying to grow your revenues, it's not just about business models, it's about competitive business models. Right? What can I do that the other guys are not doing yet? Because that's how I grow my revenue, right? So being able to phrase it in that context, it becomes very important. And same goes for revenue protection, right? One of our very, very early customers, I won't name them here, but they were really worried about it. They were growing well, and actually they got acquired by IBM later, but they had a business in their software was getting pirated all over the place, especially in Eastern Europe. And part of them was their marketing folks were like, that's not bad, right? A little bit of piracy is not bad. Our name's getting out there, and those guys will ultimately buy our product. And there's an element of truth to that, right? You have a viral effect going on, and those kids who are pirating at some point will graduate and will feel differently and will buy the software because they used it, right? But the other side of you is, well, it's growth that you're sacrificing. So you need to be able to, depending on which stage you are at, being able to position it correctly becomes very important, right? especially for the licensing project owner. I'm not sure Mark Hurt's picture is the most popular to put up in Silicon Valley, but we did it anyway, so what the heck. So all these acquisitions, then the issue is, what do you need to focus on, right? And I think it does become about customer experience. That's the second. So you have to, by the way, you never gave up the first. So these are building on each other, right? I've yet to meet a company that decides, revenue growth is not important. So that will always be important. Now the issue is, what are the other things important? And to me, where it becomes important when you start thinking about customer focus, it's a licensing flexibility, right? It's no longer about the models you want to offer as a PM or product manager or whoever, but it's about how the customers want to actually buy your product. And listening to them sometimes is the best thing you can ever do, right? And I told you our example with AWS, that's how it came about, right? If AWS could offer encryption service and they were successful, the first question was, well, somebody's buying it. If somebody's buying it, then if we offered something similar for other products, they will buy that too. And that's what led to our cloud-based, usage-based models in our security products. So I think just flexibility of licensing. And the last point, I know it's been abused at a lot of different licensing live events, but it remains true every time. Customers expect transparency now, right? So yes, you have big package software that can still sit on the shelf and nobody cares, but more and more, I can tell you when we have executive meetings with our IT team and stuff, we go through what we paid for and what we're using, right? And if that's not what we're doing, why are we using it in the first place? Why do we pay them that much? So the transparency of the customer becomes important, and how do you actually generate that? How do you report that out all the way to your teams, but also to your customers as well? And the last thing, which is where I think we're headed now, as I mentioned to you, is bringing it all together. You have to then start thinking about operations. And the two things that hit us most is automation of everything. Right? Everything you can automate, the better off you are. So everything from the time the order gets into the system to how it's shipped, do you track the licenses, and do you track the entitlements after when the customer calls you back for more, right? So that process, the more you can automate, just the better off you are as a company, right? And also you don't have to go to multiple systems, that leads to centralization, right? Which to us was, and that's why Central Cloud is kicking in for us to say, let's use one system in the back end that does track everything for us over time. We have a set of APIs that we can ship to our R&D teams for different products. If you want Model A, embed this API, but the back office stuff is centralized, right? And it sounds simple, not easy to do, right? But it takes discipline and drives from the top down. Because I can tell you there's enough inertia in the organizations, even of our size, and we're only about 1,500 people. Some of you are much bigger, that inertia can take over and you'll never get it done. So keeping the executive attention on those things, to me is extremely, extremely critical. So with that, I'm going to probably end here. Just take a couple of questions if there are any. Do you want to, or no? No questions? I'll look at Ansgar.
We have a minute? Yes,
and Tom's
please.
standing pretty still so you can't leave the room either. He's still guarding it. So anyway, I just want to finish up here, but I'll take some any questions around the topic, but also on the Gemalto topic as well, if there are any.
Well, Salesforce still loses $250 million last year. But,
That's why I'm at the top.
The dominant player in SaaS, but they lose money. Cash flow positive, but they lose money. It's hard to explain what a good SaaS model is when the leader
That's a great question.
in the industry still loses money. It's only growing 30%.
That's a great question. This is what, people have different philosophies around what that, how far you can do it, right? By the question, if you guys didn't hear the question, that the number one SaaS company out there, as Salesforce.com, still loses money, even though I think they are cash flow positive, as you pointed out. But they're growing, 30% or something, right? They're definitely growing very well. Now, jokingly, I was going to say they do qualify for the rule of 30, right? 30% zero. But the other side to me is, I think in the SaaS world, cash collection does take over, right? If you're purely SaaS company, and I can tell you, one of our businesses is authentication, where we went from an on-prem solution to offering a cloud-based authentication solution. And on that one, we only report internally even. Now, it gets merged into our overall numbers, but when we look at the business itself, we focus mainly on cash collection. Because especially in the early stages, right? Because you're getting the subscriptions from your customers, but it's not turning into revenue necessarily, right? And you're scaling the infrastructure, but it takes cost. So we actually look at the pure cash that we're getting in, even though we're not recognizing it as revenue yet, and the cash going out to build out the infrastructure. But in our theory, though, it won't scale to the level of being not profitable, right? We definitely have put clear mandates on different business areas as to what they need to generate at the contribution margin level for us. So I can't speak for Salesforce.com, but obviously there are exceptions to the rule, I'm sure, there. Any others? Great. Well, thanks very much, and I hope you have a great conference as well.
Thank you very much, Prakash. As a SafeNet employee, it's interesting to see you, when you work for a company, you always hope that your employer is smarter than everybody else, and until there's the day where you find out they aren't. Yeah, as salespeople, we often work with customers on projects where a project team tries to look at external licensing solutions, try to develop a licensing project, and at the end, nothing happens. Yeah, because the executive management team at this customer doesn't see licensing as a priority yet. And then usually, if you are around long enough, 2, 3, 4 years later, really long time tables, the customer comes back and says, now we are there. Yeah, now we want to do something. And when the point is there where they want to do something, of course, they usually have created a mess in the meantime. Yeah, and you have to clean up a lot of things to do it right. So all I can wish all of us is that this oh shit moments comes early. It comes anyway, yeah. But I think the earlier it comes, the better, because then you have less of a mess to fix, yeah, than if it comes pretty late. Thank you, Prakash, for your presentation. Our next speaker is